Car makers are pushing AI in their cars for 2026 and 2027, and customers are pushing back by not purchasing new cars. What's wrong with them? So I made this video after making the Windows 11 video back a few weeks ago. And the reason why is I saw many people that are pointing to other industries that are basically doing the same thing that Microsoft was doing. And I urge you to watch the Windows 11 video, on the fact that Microsoft is pushing many AI features into their operating system when the users aren't asking for them. And users are pushing back on it and they're switching to other platforms, Linux, Mac, things like that. Well, the same thing's occurring in the automobile industry, and it's probably a bigger deal there because there's many manufacturers that are making the same mistake that Microsoft made. So in other words, they're pushing AI features down the throats of new car buyers, and many of the new car buyers are not seeing the value in these features that I think the automobile manufacturers thought they would see. And they're pushing back on it, and they're going to competitors that are having, using AI less, or they're buying used cars instead of buying new cars. But they're not buying AI-enabled cars, at the scale that I think the automobile manufacturers thought they would buy. So let's look into why that is. So there's a couple of layers to think about here. Now, I own a old Ford F-150 with Apple CarPlay in it, and it links up with my phone, and is able to use Siri, and it's able to use AI chat engines that are held within my phone, and I can use any one that I want, ChatGPT and other systems, what have you. So that turns my car, into a peripheral for AI systems. I'm able to talk to whatever AI systems that I need. What the automobile manufacturers are doing today in 2026 and 2027, they're making the AI features systemic to the cars. In other words, it's not an option. In other words, you're not having to add your phone and use your AI features through your phone, but they're building it into the processors of the car. And so they have a touchscreen, climate control, auto driving capabilities, all these kind of cool things that people are building into newer cars. But they're building AI around it in such an annoying and unproductive way that many people are looking at it are saying, I don't want this. And they're saying it loud and clear. And I'm talking about people who are, very techie, and they may use AI in their professional life and their personal life. They just don't want it to be part of the driving experience. I think automobile manufacturers didn't see that coming. So according to JD Power, the infotainment experience is annoying. The AI story backfires. And in the real world, drivers judge AI through the screen and voice controls. When those are glitchy or confusing, it creates frustration, not a reason to recommend a car. So people are having odd experiences with these AI systems that are built systemically within the car. So in other words, they're native to the car. They're not on a phone or another peripheral device. And the reason is they can't use them as seamlessly as they should be able to use them. They're getting software updates that turn out to be glitchy and full of bugs and have to be updated again. And they're not necessarily able to operate their car at the degree of productivity and safety that they really should be because all of these AI features are getting in the way. So AI often adds friction to simple tasks. If smart features require extra prompts, corrections, and menu hunting just to change the temperature or start navigation, customer feels like the car is harder to use, not better. And I'm hearing that from many people who bought new cars, and they bought new cars with lots of the bells and whistles, including many of the native AI capabilities within the brand of car and the model of car and the type of car and the trim level that they purchase, where they're unable to do simple things. They're making very simple things very hard, like adjust their seat or adjust the climate, raise the temperature, lower the temperature, things like that. They put a layer of AI systems on top of those interfaces now with the idea that they're going to automate lots of things for you. So in other words, they're able to guess what temperature you're going to need and guess what seat position you're going to need based on, them guessing who's going to be using the car or driving the car. All the things that we've had in the past, but going to this level of AI, going to this layer of AI to get to those features is fundamentally unproductive for the drivers. And they view that as not necessarily an upgrade. They view it as a downgrade because they can't use very simple things using very simple mechanisms like a mechanical button, versus something that exists on a touchscreen. So car buyers value predictability more than cleverness. So in a vehicle, mostly works isn't impressive. It feels risky, so AI that behaves inconsistently won't drive upgrades or brand switching. So we're not putting foundational things or features in terms of building technology into cars in high esteem, I think, than the automobile manufacturers thought we would. And so they're introducing all of these great, great AI features, which is cool, but there's not enough value there to really kind of change our propensity to buy a particular car brand. And many people who buy a particular car brand don't value the AI features. In fact, they look at them as an annoying thing, and many people turn them off if they can once they purchase the car. I think that's something that the automobile manufacturers, underestimated. They were all in on AI, and they thought AI is going to be the way we're moving the world forward, and they're going to appreciate all these native AI features in whatever car they're buying. People don't. And the big one would be the pay-as-you-go model and the subscriptions that come along with a car. So in other words, you buy a car and you get a subscription model, very much like Netflix or any other annoying subscriptions that we have in our lives that deal with automation of the car. And so you're paying ongoing for some sort of a feature that the car provides. So subscriptions turn, features into disappointment. When buyers discover that an AI feature is a trial, which is going to be paywalled later, it creates resentment and reduces word of mouth, which is the opposite of driving new sales. So what's happening is people are buying these cars, not necessarily understanding that we're going to have a reoccurring subscription that's going to come along with this car, and to get updates and to use the AI systems and use some of the features that were sold with the car, we have to pay additional money for. And I understand the automobile manufacturers are all for it because they see a reoccurring model that's going to, pay them for several years after someone pays them for the car. But people who own the car are really annoyed at that, to the point of people, selling their car because they're very angry in the fact that they have this subscription that comes along with a very expensive car. And I think automobile manufacturers underestimated the pushback on that. People are sick of subscriptions. They have so many in their lives. They even buy services that are able to shut down these subscriptions for them. They're a huge waste of money for the most part. And this really kind comes into something that's no better. And so in other words, if you're able to operate your HVAC system in your car, better through some sort of subscription services, why do we even need that? In other words, we can use mechanical buttons to turn the heat on or turn the heat off, or turn the air conditioner on, turn the air conditioner off. We don't need this layer of AI that sits between us and getting to the core basic services of operating a vehicle. And I think the automobile industry just totally stubbed their toe on that. And whoever was the brilliant person who thought that subscription services that came along with a new car were going to be a good idea should be fired. So the industry is investing heavily in software that doesn't prove that customers will pay more. Automakers are clearly betting on software-defined cars, yet the monetization path is still uncertain, meaning the spending is ahead of proven customer pull. So software-defined car is something that's good. In other words, I think, we saw this rise with the rise of Teslas and some of the electric cars out there where they're basically, iPhones that are, with wheels on them, and they get updates to their operating system, things like that. I understand that. And people are down with the technology. It's just making it too much part of the driving experience is where they're falling off the rails. And as McKinsey pointed out, and you'll see that in the references below, this is going to be the case. In other words, the customers aren't seeing the value, and they're not necessarily being pulled into use of a car based on the fact that it has software-defined services. In fact, most people who buy cars don't care. Even when AI boosts satisfaction a bit, that's not the same as selling more cars. Satisfaction improvements can help retention, but they don't automatically change purchase timing. So willingness to pay or conquest sales, so it's not pushing the needle is what they're saying. And this according to JD Powers. And again, see that in the reference list in the description. So they're finding the fact that the AI features that people are putting natively in these cars don't drive the needle. In other words, people don't care about them as much as people thought. And I think that, by the way, that's not just automobiles, it's computers and smart devices and other things that are out there. People like to use AI. And I'm not pushing back against AI. They like using chatbots and LLMs and things like that. And, the ability to balance their checkbook and the ability to proofread documents and all that kind of stuff. But pushing it down into everything that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is where people are kind of drawing the line. They're kind of sick of it. In other words, it's overly integrated in everything that you do. It's integrated in your word processor with Copilot. It's integrated with your search engine. With the Gemini stuff that hangs off of Google. And it doesn't necessarily need to be systemic to every part of the car. In other words, I'm into you operating my car safely and reliably and optimize gas mileage and optimize performance and all that kind of stuff. But I don't necessarily need to go through layers and layers of stuff. I shouldn't be seeing it. So in other words, if you want to put it in as an automation, I think that's perfectly fine. But you keep dragging the humans, into these amazing features that you're showing them that they almost never want to use. And of course, everybody knows that in 2 to 3 years, a lot of those native features, those AI features that are native to the cars that people are pushing into the cars that they're selling are going to look, old and outdated in just a few years. And there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to get software updates, things like that, but the interfaces and the, technology they use and the screens they use are just going to become outdated because that's how technology moves. And it also gets cheaper and gets better, but you're not going to be able to take advantage of that because it's hard locked and hard mounted into your vehicle that you just paid $150,000 for. So AI is an unclear label, so it's weak persuasion. When the term covers everything from basic voice commands to fancy automation, buyers stop treating it as a concrete benefit and fall back to price, reliability, comfort, and range. As we saw with the rollout of some of the electric cars out there, people just want reliability, safety, and really consistency. In other words, when they hop into a car, they want the thing to go. And they don't have to worry about the range of the car, and they don't have to worry about the braking systems and the HVAC system, things like that. And whether or not they press a button or talk to a chatbot doesn't really matter to them at the end of the day. And by the way, you could have the most engaged technical person. I'm a huge techie, a huge geek. I love technology, and certainly automobile technology is no different. But I also understand about the usefulness of this stuff. In other words, the ability for the rank and file people who are just driving a car to look at the value of this and what the value is able to bring. And we've just done too much pushing of this technology down everybody's throats. And I think people are sick of it. And they're sick of it in all aspects of their lives, but they're definitely going to be sick of it in the matter of a car that they're trying to just buy reliable, consistent transportation. And they're getting these very complex beasts that are charging them $50 a month to, keep the darn things going. And people don't need it anymore. We have reliable cars. Most cars are going to be good and reliable. And I'm okay with making them more safe, and I'm okay with making them more optimized. I'm just don't think it's going to be the right thing to pull the consumer into every aspect of that. I don't think they care as much as I think the automobile manufacturers think they care. Well, anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, whether you've been pushing back on AI native features in your car or you think they're great. Obviously, I'm just one opinion. So don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos here on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn Learning courses, and of course, my Generative AI Architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.